Okay, so we're jumping right into the comparison between our Sony A7 III and our A6600. A lot of differences, of course, and a lot of similarities as well. But let's just jump in first to see the physical differences. Later we're going to compare some technical specs and as well see some actual tests comparing the two in terms of image quality, ISO performance, and video and whatnot. So let's dive right in here. What are they? They're both E-mount cameras, meaning they're going to take the same lenses. You can use full frame lenses on the APS-C or the 6600, but you can't use APS-C lenses on the A7 III. But it is nice that Sony has chosen to keep the E-mount standard across all of their mirrorless lineup, which is a really nice feature. So they're both mirrorless cameras. One of the main differences, of course, one is a full frame 35mm sensor and one is a smaller APS-C sensor. Obviously there's a size and weight difference between the two, the A7 III being a bit bigger and heavier, but they're both completely portable and absolutely great to transport. One of the main physical differences on the front of the camera is this dial here. And this is a great feature on the A7 III, which I love. You can easily control your aperture or shutter speed, and you don't have that on the A6600. On the top of the cameras, it's pretty much the same story, except the A7 III has an exposure compensation dial. And do note that the A6600 does not have a pop-up flash like most of the other A6000 series cameras. Now on the back of the cameras there are some major differences. The EVF placement, for example, does protrude up on the A7 III, where it's basically parallel on the A6600 and a lot smaller. They both have custom buttons but in different spots, and this is a new inclusion of the A6600, which is really nice to see. There are a few buttons that the A7 III has that you won't find on the A6600. These include a back button focus and an exposure lock button. And most importantly for me, a little joystick to control your autofocus and whatnot. This is one of the things that bug me about the A6600 that I really wish they would have included. It's just a natural, intuitive part of the A7 III, and it makes it a lot easier to navigate around. Everything else is pretty much the same. There is another physical dial that just varies in size and placement. In the bottom of each camera in the grip, you'll find the amazing Z-type battery, and this is also another addition to the A6600 that's exclusive to this camera in the APS-C line. This is just a fantastic feature. Compared to a lot of mirrorless cameras out there, the battery life is just outstanding. A huge thumbs up to Sony, and honestly one of the main decisions for me buying this camera. Another difference that's apparent here is the single UHS 1 slot in the A6600. And this is located right here in the battery compartment, opposed to the A7 III's dual card slots, one UHS 1 and one UHS 2, found on the side of the camera. Next, the inputs and the outputs. The A6600 has a nice little flip cover covering its inputs and outputs, whereas the A7 III is very messy. It has three individual covers which are not very well put together and really aren't weather sealed whatsoever. However, they both have microphone as well as headphone jacks. You got your micro HDMI and a USB slot for your file transfers and charging. For some reason, the A6600 has the old style of USB, where the A7 III has the USB Type-C. That's a bit confusing for me. Another major difference between these two, well, of course the A7 III does not have a fully articulating screen, nor does the A6600, but it does flip up so you can record yourself. So for creators and people that vlog and things like that, it's just very convenient. It's nice to have without having to set up a big rig and having an external monitor when you really don't need one. Fantastic feature, and again, probably one of my favorite features of the A6600. Now let's compare some specs as well as the performance of these two cameras. Remember that there is a significant price difference between these two, as well as an announcement date that was about a year and a half apart. The Sony A7 III was announced in February of 2018, and the A6600 was announced in August 2019. They both have 24 megapixel sensors. The A7 III has a backside illuminated full frame CMOS sensor, where the A6600 is an older APS-C sensor that you'll find in the A6400 and whatnot. The native ISO range on the A7 III goes up to 51,200, where the A6600 caps out at 32,000. Like I mentioned before, they're both Sony E-mount and both have in-body image stabilization or IBIS, and they're equally effective. We already covered the 3-inch touchscreen that they both have, concluding that the A6600 wins because of the flip-up capabilities. They both share a 2.35 million dot EVF, which by today's standards is not very good. Shooting speed, however, is fantastic with 10 frames on the A7 III and 11 on the A6600. When it comes to video, we're going to do a few tests here in a minute, but they're both capable at shooting 4K at 30p as well as 1080 at 120. Nothing groundbreaking here, but to be honest, it's enough for most people. We already established that they both have the amazing Z-type battery, and as far as autofocus goes, they're both very capable, but the edge does go to the A6600, which does have fewer AF points but a newer and faster system, including real-time tracking and eye autofocus in video. Now let's have a look at some actual real-life comparisons. Here's a look at ISO performances between these two cameras, starting with the A6600. And I've gone ahead and color-coded my recommendations for you for both of these cameras on really your max ISO setting. Each camera and each sensor is going to have a different rating, and each photographer is going to have a different idea about what they're willing to accept in terms of quality. So this is just an idea to show you guys the differences between the two, and here they are. You're obviously never going to realistically use ISOs this high. This is just kind of fun to show you what it's capable of. And here's the A7 III in action. Of course, for a number of reasons, including being full frame, the A7 III is going to have better low light and ISO performance. And the point isn't to make a ridiculous comparison between a crop and a full frame camera. I just made this to show if you're deciding between one of these two cameras, this is what you can expect. The A7 III does go all the way up to 204,800 ISO, but again, you're never going to use it that high. And here's another look at the differences side by side. Now for you video shooters, let's compare these two cameras in terms of rolling shutter. The A7 III actually handles it pretty decently, but unfortunately, the A6600 is just horrible when it comes to rolling shutter. This is one of its downsides when it comes to the video aspect. Now let's have a look at how they perform in higher ISOs with video. And yeah, excuse the white balance. By the way, more good news on the video front for the A6600. It doesn't have a recording limit, where the A7 III is capped at 30 minutes. Finally, let's have a look at the dynamic range between these two. Surprisingly, the A6600 keeps up incredibly well. This is a controlled environment, and of course they're going to perform differently because of the different sensors, but it absolutely holds its own. Okay, so that's pretty much it for the in-depth tests here, but let's have a look at our comparison charts to see who wins in terms of size, build, performance, and value. When it comes to size, it's easy to see that the 6600 is smaller, lighter, more compact, and therefore gets the go-ahead in the size category. Where build is concerned, the A6600 is definitely an improvement upon the other A6000 series cameras, but as far as overall build quality, the A7 III is going to take it for sure. Next, when it comes to performance, they're both going to perform fantastic in their own way, and again, it's really not fair to compare because one is a full frame sensor and one is a crop sensor, but honestly, they're both great performers and they both get a check in this regard. And finally, when it comes to value, this is an absolute no-brainer. For me, the A7 III is probably still the best value for money camera that you can buy, period. And it 100% easily gets the check mark for value. And of course, as promised, here's my personal pros and cons for each of these cameras. If you want to see an in-depth review on either of them, check out the video I have on both. And there it is, guys. There's my comparison between the Sony A7 III and the A6600. I really hope this video helped you out. I hope you enjoyed it. And if it did, if you liked it, consider hitting that like and subscribe button. If you want to pick one of these cameras up, I will leave affiliate links in the description for you as well. And like always, make mistakes, be yourself, and get Get out there and take some more pictures. See you next time.